Hey everyone, welcome to the Beauty in Between podcast. I'm Gabe, and this is my wonderful wife, Katie. Say hi, Katie.
Hi, everyone.
And so, with today's episode, we're going to be talking about loving disagreement a bit. But just before that, I want to give a rundown. How has your week been, Katie, so far?
My week has been pretty good, actually. We're coming off of my birthday week, which was just a whole week of getting to celebrate with different pockets of my and our people, which was so good. And this weekend, I got to experience the gift that you got me of getting to go see the National Broadway tour of Funny Girl, which was amazing. I could talk about that at length for a whole episode. I won't, but it was amazing, and that show means a lot to me, and it was great. And also got to celebrate my sister graduating from her residency. So congratulations, Dr. Nguyen. And this is how we will test to see if she actually listened to all of our episodes, because I know she's behind because she's been in her residency. But anyway, I think I learned this that transitioning from summer to fall, even though we do not have kids and neither of us is in school, that it doesn't matter. The transition from summer to starting to get into fall schedule and things is a little bit of a bumpy ride. Because I'm that type of person who I like being able to help people with side projects and side gigs and things within my capability and ability, but the different people that I've been helping with like random things on the side, I kind of disappeared for most of August. I forgot that August is a little bit of a scramble.
And y'all just had the first meeting with the cohort people yesterday. So next month it's going to be like a full start for y'all, but it's been probably a lot of preparations to get everything ready. And the party that y'all had for that first cohort, or like that first class for the cohort class, not really, but it was super fun, and it seemed like it went great.
I completely agree. So that was fun. But yes, so August has been a lot of preparation. So that's what I'm coming off of. What about you, Gabriel?
Yeah, for my week, I mean, it's been good so far. I have still been like job searching for the past couple weeks, but it's been cool to be able to kind of, I guess, like get a better vision of what I want to do and kind of starting to fine tune that a little bit more. And so I'm super excited with the next week or two, because I think I'll get a lot more of the actual like practical parts of what jobs to apply to and like what companies, what workers people know around us, which is super exciting. And I'm super excited to finally be in a place where I feel like I will be a little more solidified and can, grow somewhere into who I am. And that's been a long time coming. So excited for it. It's a little bit nervous time, but God has helped to calm a lot of those things, or a lot of those feelings. Because like I said to you in the past, Katie, like in the past, I would have been much more ruffled in the position that I am, but now it feels more comfortable, or the excitement is overpowering the anxiety, I'd say a fair amount, which is usually the opposite. Usually I feel the anxiety first, and then feel the excitement once things actually go, once things are actually here. So that's been nice. And yeah, I'm excited for today's episode. So give us a little rundown of what we're talking about.
Yeah, so welcome everyone to the last episode of season 1. And today we're talking about, can you be friends with people you disagree with? And the reason that I thought that I brought this up to Gabe for us to talk a little bit about is that, one, we thought that hopefully this conversation can be helpful as we are we're wrapping up the podcast season. But now our country as a whole is going to be stepping into those later moments of the presidential election. And I am pretty sure that things are just going to get more heated and more difficult to navigate, much less to the point of when it actually comes time to show up at the polls and decide what you're going to do, much less what happens in this country after. So this topic hopefully can sort of serve as a foundational starting point. Another reason that I wanted to talk about it is that I think the concept for a lot of us of being in some sort of relationship or being in some sort of community with people that we disagree with, I think in theory, a lot of us will agree that it's theoretically a good idea to be friends with people who we disagree with, because we think it's a good idea. But as far as actually doing it, I think we, as just human beings, are not so great at it in practice. There's that one saying, what is it? Birds of a feather flock together, kind of thing. That saying floats around in my brain every so often because I feel like I am friends with a lot of people who are pretty different than me in at least personality, because as we've talked about on this podcast, I am historically the extrovert that collects introverts because I think there's a lot that I miss when I'm being the extroverted host, so to speak. But yeah, I just thought it would be a good conversation to sort of get into today.
So you said the thought or that phrase floats in your mind. Does it ever fly in your mind?
Oh my gosh, I was trying not to say that.
Anyways, yeah, so it's a really interesting conversation of just that idea of being with people that we disagree with. A lot of people that even are surrounded by people that are unlike them or that they might disagree with, they'll have these disagreements that are kind of set in stone. But even with those people, they don't have the conversations or they have these kind of no topics. And so even if they have a disagreement, they don't ever sit in the disagreement or actually like touch it. It's just kind of a further off topic. And they're like, it's there, but I am more interested in these things rather than diving into the disagreement at all or trying to learn from it.
Mm-hmm. So exactly what you just described. There's a friend of mine, who obviously you also know, who the more that we have become friends, and I want to do my best to not say her name because I didn't ask her permission to talk about her. But there's a friend of mine who I've known for, you can round it up to 10 years. And the more that we've gotten to know each other and the better friends that we have become, the more we have realized that we have pretty differing thoughts and opinions. And I mean, in some ways, even theologies, for most things. Like, for one, she's white and I'm not. And she approaches topics of race and systemic injustice differently than I do. She doesn't disagree that it's important and that it's a problem, but her like lived experience and just understanding of the nature of some of those things is different. So, which has been interesting because she and I have had some interesting, helpful, good conversations on that topic. And in a lot of other ways, she's also, just personality-wise, she's more introverted than I am. In general, she's also a lot more trusting of the church as an institution than I am. So my friendship with her, as an example, is really interesting because she is also a believer. And I think recently we had a conversation where we were talking about that's almost all we have in common as far as just kind of surface level markers of like, oh, it makes sense that that person is friends with that person. Like, that's one of the main things. That's kind of it in a lot of ways. And I really value our friendship. I think a differential between my friendship with her and maybe other people that I've come across in my life is that she and I are both willing to engage in the uncomfortable. And when we come across topics, this podcast is not going to be about politics, but when she and I talk about politics and our government system and structure and people in power and all of that, we do disagree on certain topics. But instead of leaning away from each other and instead of just aiming for a nice civility where, you know, where the goal is that we're not at each other's throats, instead we both lean into those conversations where we have differing opinions and different thoughts regarding policy, system, structure, etc. And every single time that we do, because we both respect each other and we're both willing to engage in deep conversation, those conversations are always so edifying. And at the same time, they're not easy by any means. And there have been plenty of conversations that she and I have had where we don't end the conversation with like, yes, we both agree that this is exactly what should be done. But more often than not, we both come away with a deeper understanding of the shared goal.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned with that was the kind of like honor system that you'll have there where each one believes the other one will honor each other. And y'all can kind of trust that. So that's like one of the big things that I see within those relationships that are okay with sitting in that agreement or even talking about it, evaluating it, is that trust that you have for one another. And I mean, we've kind of talked about it a little bit before, like the trust that we have for other people and how that can be seen as vulnerable sometimes. And I think, especially in like such changing times where there are people that have such like radical opinions or take everything, or there are a fair amount of people that will take things to the extreme, it's hard to share some of those thoughts sometimes because you're like, man, I don't want to be perceived in this certain way because of what has kind of been shown as the example. And so there has to be like a little bit of trust within your conversation too. And sometimes that's a place where there are steps slowly taken and you start to kind of slowly tell them, hey, this is what I believe in this is what I believe in this. And yeah, I think that trust and honor system is huge and a huge part of being able to not only share the things, but being able to listen to one another, because those are the two huge things within that you have to have is like being able to know that you are listened to and being able to be seen. And so like for a lot of people, if you can fulfill those things, that's really important to them. And, not just engaging from your perspective, your view, but being able to understand what they're saying. One of the things that I heard you mention with this friend of yours was that whenever y'all have conversations, like sometimes you are on complete different sides, but sometimes there are also small disagreements in how to engage with the topic at hand, and how it might be like, yeah, we're on the same side, but we come at it from a different perspective or a different starting point. And sometimes even that small thing is still, can be a great topic to talk about.
Yes. And so that reminds me of a lot of conversations and a lot of things that I've been thinking about recently. So we should have started at the top of this podcast with the book Loving Disagreement.
Yes,
that Kathy Khang
very
and
important.
Matt Mikalatos. Matt, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to pronounce your last name. But Kathy and Matt wrote this book called Loving Disagreement, Fighting for Community Through the Fruits of the Spirit, I believe. First of all, if you listener haven't read or listened to their book, and I believe that they actually did record the audio version for it, you should absolutely go find it and read it, especially if you have not read it entering into this season. Like, now is the time. Go read it.
Yeah. It's one of my homework pieces too, is I need to hop on top of reading the audiobook and reading somewhat in the actual text, but listening to that audiobook a lot, because I do think it's super useful. And Katie's talked about it all the time. And the cover, beautiful, by the way.
Yes, it's so good. But all that being said, so I read the book, I think later at the end of last year, and then I think I wrote a book review earlier this year, and I just wrote another couple of blog posts for Chasing Justice that are based off of that book. So the reason that I bring this up is that one of the key tenets that Matt and Kathy talk about in regarding this topic of disagreement and how do we as believers, as followers of Jesus, how do we show up distinctly and how do we distinctly engage in disagreement as opposed to the rest of the world? Something that they constantly are telling us, the readers, as we go through that book, is that Jesus raised the bar for human beings engaging in disagreement. And I think something that they point out that I have loved reading their expanded thoughts on it. I'm not going to tell you everything that they say, but the idea that the bar is being raised from beyond hearing that you disagree with somebody and then you just acknowledge them and say, okay, well, we can agree to disagree, and then just sort of skirt over the topic. And if it's family or somebody you're in relationship with, and you just never revisit that topic again. But what the invitation of the gospel of doing justice, of loving mercy, of engaging and loving God and your neighbors well, is not to just discount and repress a whole topic of conversation, where in some ways the goal of disagreement should be way more than just being nice or being civil. That is where the fruits of the Spirit come in. The goal of disagreement is hopefully that we as Christians can be part of ushering in pieces and pockets of the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, and ushering in pieces of shalom. And their section on shalom has been what I've been writing about a lot recently, that I'll just give y'all a little bit of a snippet, that what they present in the book is that shalom, especially in America and the West, in Christianity, we've heard that word. If you've grown up in the church or been around it at all, you've probably heard that shalom is the Hebrew word for peace, and that, you know, Jesus is a Prince of Peace, and we should be peace makers and not peacekeepers. And that's about what I think is pretty common. But the thing that Matt and Kathy talk about is that being midwives, so to speak, of ushering in shalom onto earth is not a painless process, and it is not an easy process. So when we come to the topic of disagreeing and figuring out how to engage in that, the goal and the bar should be so much higher than just civility and just getting to a point where we can all just sweep things under the rug and carry on. Hopefully we can engage in a conversation where two parties or more are disagreeing with honor and respect and dignity for that human being. And at the same time, let me also add this caveat, that there are certain topics that our world and our government, country, etc., are engaged in right now that are incredibly polarizing, where there are literal lives, not just on the line, but lives that are being lost, and a lot of children's lives who are being lost. And that is already far too many. So the other piece and reminder when it comes to disagreeing is that the goal is not reaching a middle ground, because at some point Jesus took a stance. He made it very clear where he stands and where we as believers are to stand on the topic of prioritizing life, on prioritizing all life and collective flourishing across the globe. So all of that is just my caveat of, again, saying that engaging in disagreement should not look like aiming for civility or aiming for a comfortable landing, or even, I want to take away, and the ironic part is that this is the beauty in between podcast, but I want to take away that sense that the Christian stance is to just hold the middle in a lot of ways. And that is where I think we get into hot water. If all we're going for is aiming for the lukewarm middle, even I can pull out scripture. I mean, Revelation talks about lukewarm water being good for nothing, not just because it doesn't take a stance, but hot or cold water actually can bring healing, which is what those scriptures are talking about. Whereas lukewarm water is where the bacteria grows. That's where the mold grows. That's where harm can carry forward.
Yeah, I think even talking about the idea of kind of being on one side or the other and thinking about the middle, whenever we go out to these further sides, it can be harder to really change our position or to change what we think. But even in those points, whenever we know that we will disagree on it, it's still great to hear the other person's perspective, because it can help you to, mold your own, or even being able to know, when you're talking to anybody else about the issue or about a subject, knowing where the other people can come from. And so it helps you to see a broader amount of people where they are, rather than where you think they are. And a lot of times within these issues, even the examples that you're talking about with the political system, with, for example, war and genocide, there are real people in these situations. These aren't just some, theoretical things that are going on. These are real people's lives that are at stake. And the people that we are talking to or discussing these things with are also real people. And so it's so important to understand where they are. And for some of these people, they're being put in such a place of danger. And that needs to matter to us as Christians. Whenever we see people in these dangerous or vulnerable situations, we need to be a voice or a speaker for aid and for justice and mercy in these things. And, that's something that Katie is huge about, and even recently, whenever I keep on bringing it back to this, which is funny, but the sermon that I preached about a month ago, or I guess 2 months ago, was talking about in James in James 1 specifically, how we are supposed to, listen quickly, be slow to speak and slow to anger. And even in that, like, slow to speak and slow to anger, like, we've got to be those things. But at the same time, Jesus calls us, or God calls us in James, to be quick to listen. And so we can't forget one of those core things, and especially not the first thing that he tells us within that. And so listening is such a key component. And I think it's awesome whenever, you can kind of be a little more flexible in your position and say, okay, I want to constantly be evolving my understanding. Like, for instance, the place that we're at with some of the political examples now, it's crazy different environment than what we were, years ago. And it's a new thing to consider. And we need to make sure that we are ready to, be ready for what's actually the present.
One other thing, too, of what you're saying just reminded me of, and the topic of what we're sticking to more of just being friends with and being in community and relationship with people who you disagree with. The funny thing about that question and phrasing is that I can guarantee that every single one of us is in relationship with people who we disagree with. I mean, really, I was thinking about this sometime last week in preparation for this episode. Like, you and I, there's no way that we agree on everything. Now, I can't think of an example right off the top of my head. We do have disagreements as the married people. Sometimes. But yeah, that's why the concept of engaging and figuring out how to argue well and how to engage in conflict and disagreement in marriage is so important, because there is the baked in idea that there are two humans who have decided to come together into a union and function as one. But they're still two humans, which means they are going to disagree on things, because we do not all think the same. This is why the Christian stance, the idea of a Christian stance being a monolith, is just straight up a lie. Because in a lot of ways, when people just like to throw out, oh, well, the Bible says this, so I'm right. The Bible says a lot of things. The Christian stance should be one that prioritizes life. The human stance should be one that prioritizes life. The problem is when we as humans are engaging with each other and are much more concerned with beating each other into submission and into agreement and into civility, rather than coming together for the shared goal of engendering shalom and engendering the fruits of the Spirit and bringing collective healing and freedom and flourishing. Those are the things to keep in mind. And then it's helpful to have a self perspective that you keep in mind, that this is something that someone pointed out to me months ago. We, biologically, as humans, do not have any sense of internal brain chemistry or alert system in our brains to tell us when we are wrong about something, which is why community is so important, and being around people who you do disagree with and can engage with in an honoring and respectful way is so important, because on our own, we are absolutely, everybody's going to be wrong about things. That's just, we're limited beings. So, of course, we're wrong about things. There are things that scientists 100 years ago said was absolute undeniable fact and truth that scientists nowadays have now shown to be incorrect, and they have a new, greater, and broader understanding. That's just the way of human growth, and where the growth mindset comes in that we talked about earlier on this podcast season. But yeah, the fact that we as humans don't have an internal sense of when we're wrong, I think is a major reason that it is so important to not just value being around people who you disagree with or have a different sense of the world, but that we value each other and humanity enough to actually choose to engage in those conversations while choosing not to fight the people.
Yeah. It's knowing that people bring different things to the situation. Like even whenever we start the podcast, we're talking about how our week's been going. If you come to a podcast episode or if you come to some sort of event, and you've had a really terrible week and man, I've been losing sleep, all these different things, there are things that are going to affect you in your conversations and in your interactions. And like I said, and like Katie was mentioning a second ago about that human, like it's a real human person. So sometimes with these different things, like I, rely on more like logic whenever I'm, walking through decisions or options and stuff like that. But the reality is that like, I'm not always going to be right in my logic. And people that are coming to these situations, sometimes they're coming with a lot of pain or a lot of history and scars that are going to affect them in the conversation. And so if we just choose not to acknowledge it, nothing's ever going to happen. And we need to understand who the person is that we're talking with. And so that's super important in that trust of like, for you, whenever I'm talking to you, I trust that like you want the best. We love each other. And so we are in pursuit of how to love each other better. We might see those things very differently on how to actually love each other the best, but that's something you can always come back to. And that was something that I like really had emphasized with me whenever talking about just like conflict resolution. You've got to understand where the other person's coming from and any shared interests you have. Like, a lot of people want to see good for humanity. They want the right things to be done. And so that's super important to understand, to think about in the conversation. And one of the things that I was thinking about beforehand, and this is nice because the words line up so well, and I had to look up synonyms for something, but the idea that I really want to present is like, disagreement is not the problem. Disregarding is a problem. Whenever we just shut off, that is definitely a problem. And there are some situations where we'll start talking with somebody about it, and there might be a lot of things looped into it, and we might shut down and say, man, I don't really want to engage with this. And that happens sometimes. So, be okay with that happening sometimes. I don't want to make the other person uncomfortable or put them in a place where they feel in danger. But sometimes those things get brought up, and it might be something that they have to deal with or something that you can help with. But that's part of knowing the situation and knowing the person that you're talking to on a deeper level sometimes.
Yep. And that brings to mind a story that Kathy shared in the book Loving Disagreement. Again, everybody go read it or listen to it. But in the chapter where they're talking about patience, Kathy has this great example that she shares of, I'm pretty sure she and her husband basically were disagreeing about what to do about a particular situation where harm was being done. It was an important matter for them to discuss. And essentially, Kathy was sort of waiting for her husband to come not to the same conclusion, because they both agreed that there was harm happening in this particular instance, but they were disagreeing on how they were going to respond to it. And of course, this is me talking about someone else's story, but Kathy shares it. And what I loved about the way that she presented it in the book is that it was just a reminder to me that when it comes to disagreeing, even when it's something really important and everybody involved agrees that it's really important, but there's discord along the way of figuring out how to respond and what to do, that also patience is so important, and patience is a fruit of the spirit, and that not every this might be shocking, not every disagreement is going to be solved in a singular conversation. Not every disagreement is going to be solved in just 2 seconds. Especially the bigger and more harmful and more complicated the disagreements are, it's probably worth giving it more than one conversation. So when there's somebody who is shutting down or is feeling attacked, or have legitimately become triggered or anything in those sorts of conversations, that's where the reminder to people like me, who I don't mind disagreement and I don't mind conflict, because I view it as an opportunity to come to a sense of clarity and shared vision. So historically, I've always been fine with leaning into it. I have also historically pushed in different conversations, and like in our marriage, we're figuring this out, that my disposition is that I want to just lean in and engage and hash everything out, even if it's going to take 6 hours, all for the sake of the greater good, so to speak. But for people who are kind of like me in that area, that's a reminder that patience is still a fruit of the spirit, and that it is okay to have a conversation and to not come to an immediate conclusion.
Yeah. Even looking at the wording of us being ambassadors of Christ, that is an important thing. We're not here to, change all of the minds in the world. If that was our responsibility or our duty, we have failed time and time again.
We'd be screwed.
Yeah. And us as imperfect beings, we're going to get some things wrong. And sometimes we'll have to come back to the person and be, willing to admit that, hey, I said this in my conversation. Man, I'm really sorry that I said that. That was, kind of out of left field. And that was more speaking from emotion, or, hey, I've talked to some other people and I have been, convinced of this thing. But being humble in those conversations, super important, just as much as the honoring and just as much as the trusting and the loving is being humble in those arguments. And being ambassadors are, with us not having to necessarily change somebody's mind, we can be there to help other people out. We can hear people, we can see people, we can discuss with them, and maybe they can gain something, maybe we can gain something. But don't always make it about yourself, to where the disagreement doesn't have to revolve around a person and them being wrong or them being right. The basis, like I said, we want to see things be better. And so when we're having these conversations, if somebody, or sometimes people are going to have that pain or that hurt, and sometimes it'll take multiple conversations. Sometimes it'll actually just take time in general. Sometimes you'll have that initial conversation, you'll see, man, they have a lot of hurt, or they, I can't necessarily, I should engage with them right now. And maybe it's something you come back to later on, but being able to be flexible within those conversations, super important. And since we are ambassadors, to the world, we, our world is very diverse in and of itself. And so our world, or our, circle, should look something like that, because this is what the world is. And if we want to engage with that on a larger scale, we need to have a similarity of that within our own world.
And really, the last thought that I'll have, and I think that will be fine to end, is that I talked about this on a live that I hopped on to last week, in lieu of the fact that we didn't release a full episode last week. Is I had watched a video of 2 astrophysicists discussing their differing opinions on whether or not free will exists, which as a topic is relatively important. It has implications for
Super
a lot of
interesting.
things. Yeah, super interesting. Um, but these were two highly intelligent and platformed individuals who disagreed on the topic. And basically, the conversation was them sharing their disagreements and kind of dissecting why and things like that. But they were engaging with each other so well. And at the same time, it was such a constructive conversation, but it was interesting because neither one of them necessarily changed their minds, but you could tell based on what they were saying that they both were taking new things into consideration. The reason that I bring this up is because I'm one of those people who goes to the comment section on videos that I think are interesting because I'm just curious how the internet is engaging with it. And something that I noticed a lot of the comments saying was a lot of people who were like, man, this is why I really love science or the science community or what have you, because they engage in disagreement so well. And like, it wasn't just people who were like, this is why I like the science community. It's obviously all just facts and figures. Because something like free will and astrophysics and quantum physics is a lot more complicated than that. And it just had me thinking, like, man, what would the world be like if people could watch a video of two believers talking about a topic who disagree with something and have the same reaction, that maybe they come away with some sort of edification, but their main takeaway is, oh wow, this is why I love the Christian community, because they disagree so well. And even saying that now, it's almost laughable, because I feel like from a global standpoint, the Christian community is one highly marked by infighting and not disagreeing well. But we're the ones, theoretically, according to our faith, we've been given not just the tools, but the call and the spirit and the fruits of the spirit, and all the tools needed, theoretically, to be able to not just engage with disagreement well, but have healing and flourishing and relationship and community come out of disagreement.
So one of the things that I was thinking of, like, whenever you talked about this initial video and even bringing it back up now, is just the fact that somebody's value doesn't come from their knowledge. Their knowledge, or their value, sorry, is from them just being human beings, being made in the image of God. They have value in and of themselves. And so don't just base it off of how much knowledge or wisdom they have in the subject. Know that if they're people, they are worth engaging with at least a little bit, you know?
Yes. And with that being said, so what would you say is the invitation to our listeners?
Well, I think the main invitation I would say is making our world like the world around us, having diversity and being willing to engage in topics, but also at the same time, knowing that when you're having these topics, you are trusting and you are trusted. So please honor those around you in these conversations and be willing to have them. Be willing to engage with people that might seem like they're not worth the time, or that the conversation might go downhill. It's worth it to have those conversations, and let's make the world a better place by it.
Yeah, that's
my
good.
takeaway. I don't know if you have something differently.
Yeah, I'll just add that I would say that the invitation that I would present to our listeners here is to not be afraid of feeling uncomfortable or causing discomfort. I say that, and I feel like my mom is going to listen to this and be like, Katie has no problem with those things. Obviously, particularly when it comes to causing discomfort, there is an honoring and respectful way to present a conversation in a way that you know discomfort is going to happen, but you can do it in an honoring and honorable manner. I'm not going to go into examples, but yes, I just think that we need to get over fighting for comfortability and, to take the call from Kathy and Matt's book, that fighting for community, and fighting for healthy and collective flourishing and mutuality, fighting for community where all of these things are happening is worth experiencing discomfort and causing discomfort. So yes, with that being said,
that's a great place to leave it off. Is what was the wording again? Name for community?
I don't know.
I've lost the wording now. But that was a really good tidbit. I feel bad that I was trying to remember it.
It's okay. I just said it all, and then
I forgot it a few seconds later. Fight for community?
Fight for community and give up your comfortability.
Yeah.
Is essentially what I just said.
I'm sorry that I asked now, because I'm like, did it lose its point because of that? But no, fight for community. That's an awesome word to leave it with. Thank y'all for joining us today.
We will see y'all in season 2. It will be coming. Yeah. Keep an eye out for it if you have topics and things, or even just thoughts that have come up from this. Seriously, reach out to us via our Instagram DMs. Gabe might get on starting a Discord community for us for season 2. There's a lot of things coming down the pipeline. So
yeah, we'll figure out a way to bridge the gap between the seasons.
Yes, so if you've made it with us through all of season 1, thank you. It means a lot. Please continue to share this podcast, share what you think about the podcast, review, subscribe, all of the things. But just know that we love you, we support you, we're here for y'all, and we will see you soon. So thanks, everybody.
Love you, everybody. Aww. Peace.
Bye.
Bye.